Here we are in the Writers and Illustrators of the Future Lounge at the Author Services Building in Hollywood. It contains a gallery of the writer and illustrator judges, a selection of the awards the contests have received, a library containing novels and art books published by winners and judges, and a selection of photos of some of our beloved keynote speakers and guests. For nearly 4 decades, L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future contest has discovered and nurtured a steady stream of new authors and artists who have changed the face of science fiction. Chosen by an impressive panel of judges, drawn from the biggest names in the genre, contest winners are given the best possible foundation for a long-standing career. Now in its 3rd year, the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast continues to provide advice and tips from contest judges, industry professionals, and contest winners for writers and artists wanting to take their next step, along with needed inspiration to keep on going. If you are already a regular listener of this podcast, I thank you. If you are new to it, I welcome you to the weekly installment of the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host.
It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. The show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards is The Outer Realm, and that's in the category of Best Female Hosted Podcast. The Outer Realm is a popular show hosted by Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano, which has millions of listeners each week. They are well known for their laid-back, round-table style of interviewing. Together, this dynamic duo brings you the best of the best with guests from around the world who are well-versed within their respective fields of ufology, paranormal, cryptozoology, folklore, and anything else that would be deemed outside the realm of normal. Michelle is an international public figure who has spent the last 2 decades working in the international paranormal community, in research and media. Amelia is a remote viewing medium with 10 years of working with missing children, as well as cold and active murder cases. So go to podcastawards.com to nominate The Outer Realm in the category of Best Female Hosted Podcast. That's podcastawards.com. It's super easy. So just please take a moment and get out and go vote. All right, everybody, it is that time of year again. It's time for you to get out and nominate for your favorite podcast. The show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards is The Centralist in the category of Politics and News. The Centralist is a much different news and political program which is not deemed as opinion news. Listen as Joe Montaldo brings you just the facts from trusted sources, which will allow you to make up your own minds on the various stories being reported on. So go to podcastawards.com to nominate The Centralist in the category of Politics and News. And that's podcastawards.com. Take a moment, go and vote, and as Joe would say, come on guys, vote, vote, get out there, vote. What you waiting for? Yes, it's that time of year again. It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. So there's a show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. You've been hearing it for years now. It's the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast in 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. So this show is based on the world-famous Writers of the Future contest created in 1983 by L. Ron Hubbard and provides advice and tips from contest judges, international best-selling authors, world-class artists, contest winners, and industry professionals for writers and illustrators wanting to take their next step. So go to podcastawards.com and nominate the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast in all 3 categories. That was education, storyteller drama, and art. And that's podcastawards.com. So take a moment and get your votes in. It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. There's a show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards, UFO Undercover, in the category of entertainment. This show brings you some of the most revealing and current research that is being done with respect to alien abductions and contact. Host Joe Montaldo has been an abduction researcher for over 35 years and is uniquely qualified to bring you live interviews with some of the most well-known researchers in ufology. So go to podcastawards.com and nominate UFO Undercover in the category of entertainment. That's podcastawards.com. So take a moment, get out and vote.
Hello, and welcome Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer or artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field, along with contest winners and a few surprise guests. We're here this week at the workshop for volume 38 in 2022. I'm speaking with Dean Wesley Smith, who, interestingly enough, was the first person to cross the stage, having been published in Writers of the Future Volume 1. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So we wanted to have this was like a special topic that we were going to cover tonight. I sent you an essay on booze and taboos. It was an essay written by Hubbard, and it's something that is very interesting. When I've talked to various judges over the years on their favorite essays, and I've had Dave Farland, Orson Scott Card, Tim Powers. I'll talk about different ones, but the subject of booze and taboos, I thought would be working with you would be especially pertinent. So let's get on with that. So first of all, just your overview of the essay itself.
I actually love the essay. I had forgotten. I'd read it quite a while back, but when you use the title doesn't really stick with it real well. Booze. It's not booze like alcohol. It's booze like in Ghosts. Boo. Boo and taboo. Booze and taboo. It is the topic of it is fantastic because what I try to teach a lot in our workshops is that writers write what they want to write. And if an editor or somebody doesn't want it quite in a certain way, you write what you want to write, but you write it, to the point where the editor can't say no. And that's basically what Hubbard was talking about. 100%. He did it in the 1930s kind of flowery language that a lot of the articles were back at that point, especially in the writing magazines and stuff.
Yeah.
But Lester Dent and a few others, that exact same kind of language. But it's very clear what that topic is, and that is write what you want to write. It really is one of the secrets of writing fiction.
Now, some of the stuff that he went into, like in Pulp Fiction, there was this idea of the taboos. Okay. A science fiction story's got to be this, this, and this. A mystery's got to have these elements. A adventure's got to have this. And the women were always stereotypically caricatures. They're cardboard cutouts of a female. You've got to have the big, gruff, detective that was going to be there.
The hero,
find the crook, and he's going to whack him, the Philip Marlowe. Just something like that. It's going to be, that's what's got to be. Science fiction has got to be you have your evil alien, and you're going to come there and you got the rocket ship with the ray gun. You're going to, what it is, it's like, this is how you have to do it. And he intentionally would try to take those rules and just turn them on their head. So, like, in fact, the show we just did tonight, the professor was a thief. In the My Best Science Fiction Stories, he was asked, like, what's your favorite, story? And he said this one here he wanted to do. It wasn't necessarily the best literature, but at that time period, scientists had to blow things up. That was what the thing. And this one here shrank things down. So he just turned it, he would do that. So how have you found that for yourself in your career?
I'm a pulp fan. I've read, and collected over the decades, more thousands of pulps and what was interesting back then is that all the magazines had those rules or taboos that, they said, you can't do this if you're going to be in this magazine, you can't do this. And the stories that were all really good were when the writers like L. Ron Hubbard pushed past those taboos and did something that they wanted to do. When you flash forward to 2022, it's exactly the same. The readers, the editors, they don't know what they want. But they'll put out what they call nowadays, they're not called taboos, they're called guidelines, in quotes, guidelines in air quotes. And literally the guidelines are exactly the same kind of thing. You've got to do it this way. You can't do this. You can't have this kind of science fiction in this issue. And as editor myself over the years, I have done that also. I'll say to someone, oh, I don't want any Regency, or I don't want any of this, or, to get me to read that kind of fantasy, the high kind of fantasy, the George Martin kind of fantasy. I just won't read it hardly at all. So I warn the writers in a taboo kind of way. If you want to really be here, probably you want to stay away from those things. And it never fails. I always buy a story that someone makes me read, because they do it in a way that's tipped upside down, or they do it in a way that goes against my guidelines, and I can't not buy it.
Right.
And that's what Hubbard was saying, is you've got to be a good enough writer that you can take the guidelines, take the taboos, take whatever the editor doesn't want, and prove to the editor they do want it. And that's also what makes you the standout story in an issue, because if you follow the guidelines exactly, your story often falls down in the cracks. It just becomes another, it's just the same.
Yeah.
And so the writers who really stand out in issues of magazines or in anthologies or stuff like that are the ones that do take well, I'm going to prove to you that I can write that. I mean, Chris often will say, I'll never buy a circus story. She just hates circus stories. And I think almost everything she's ever edited, there's been a circus story. And she hates them, and writers make her buy them because the writer does it so well and in such a unique way. And that's basically exactly what Hubbard was saying. Whatever the taboo of the time or the guideline of the time, push past it, push beyond it, take some chances, take risks. And it turns out usually you get rewarded greatly for that risk.
Yeah. He had this one story called Mad Dog Murder about a Pekingese,
Yep.
Who was the culprit at the end. It was just the opposite of what.
Yep. You would think Mad Dog. Yeah. Pekingese. Yeah.
Yeah. So on your own career now, you've written all over the spectrum.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of ghostwriting. You've written other people's universes. You've got your own universe, short fiction, long fiction, serialized. Is there anything that you've found for yourself that's been the most, and what about it, of all those different things is the most enjoyable for you in doing them?
Wow. I pretty much follow Hubbard's advice completely. Is I only write what I want to write. I only write what I want to have fun with. So the answer to that is pretty much what I'm writing at the moment, which sounds sort of stupid, but it's also, I think I have a pretty short attention span. And which is why my novels are often, the old style novels, the 50,000.
Yeah.
And because that's enough to tell a really good story, and it's enough to keep me interested. And then past that, it's what I'm really, my subconscious comes up and says, let's go write this. Let's go play in this universe. Let's go over here and so right now I have 7 or 8 different series going, and it's just whatever strikes me at any given moment. I go, well, let's go play in my Cedars universe and write, big epic, space opera. Oh, let's go write in my time travel universe, which is my Thunder Mountain historical in the Wild West in mining towns. And I was like, oh, let's go write in my mystery series, which is my Cold Poker Gang series. And those are, they're retired Las Vegas detectives solving cold cases. And so, it just depends on what strikes me at the moment. And I'll often be writing a short story, because I'm writing a lot of short stories this year. And I'll often be just writing a short story, and I'm like, oh, there's a new series. And I will finish the short story, and that will be enough for my subconscious at that point. But at some point it'll be going, that new series you started, go take a look at that story. Let's see if we can go on with that. And it's just when my creative brain says, let's go play. And so I don't really have one that I hate or I love more than any of the others. It's just a matter of at any given moment. If someone was forcing me to write something in one of them, I probably would come to hate it quickly.
Yeah.
Because that's not what I want to do at that moment. But I'm old enough now and rich enough now that I can write anything I want. and that's really fun, so.
Now you've done a lot of ghostwriting and writing other universes. How did that come about?
That was back in the early 1990s. And we had a publishing company called Pulp House Publishing. My wife and I, Christine Catherine Rush, and I had started this publishing company, and it grew way out of hand. And we had 16 employees, and we were the fourth largest publisher of science fiction, fantasy, and horror in the nation. I was the publisher. Well, that was chewing up all my time. And over my office door, I said, we're in this for the writing, was over the office door. But of course, I wasn't hardly doing any writing at that point. So once I came out of that, I'd sold novels back in the 80s, but this was by 1992 where I said, okay, I'm going back. We kind of closed down most of the business and scaled it back to where it really should have been from the beginning. And I started writing. Well, the problem is at that point, I couldn't sell a book because I had these early novels and I didn't follow them up and I didn't grow them like I should have. So they had bad sales numbers, so I couldn't sell a book. But everybody knew I was a professional writer and I'd been doing this company. So Pocket Books hired me to start writing Star Trek books. And because basically I was a Star Trek fan. I mean, I'd go home from high school and early days of college when the first series was on. And yes, I am that old. And you can't see that through the microphone. He's really old. And I would watch Trek. So I was a hardcore Trek fan in the very first series, and suddenly getting the chance to write Star Trek. So Chris and I wrote the first one together under name Sandy Schofield. I think we wrote a lot of books under Sandy Schofield. And then we wrote some more under Catherine Wesley, her middle name and my middle name. And then I started writing them. We started writing them under both of our names. Then I started writing them individually. And in the middle of this, people knew I was a hardcore comic book fan. I used to have a comic book store. And one of the editors that was working with Marvel called me and said, would you write some Spider-Man novels? And I'm like, yeah, of course I will. And then I wrote X-Men novel, and then I did the X-Men novelization and for the first movie, and I did an Iron Man and some other stuff. And then I was sitting with an editor at a dinner at a convention, and she turned to me and she said, Dean, you write all this stuff. Could you write Men in Black? And I'm like, oh, of course I could. So I got to write original Men in Black novels between the first movie and the second movie, which was a lot of years. I was writing original Men in Black novels in there, and just having a blast. So all of those came around. And then what occurred was I was working for so many different companies doing all these other projects and gaming projects and things like that, that one day when some big New York Times major I was already a New York Times bestseller at that point, but one of the big #1 writing thriller, and an editor came to me and said, Dean, can you write his book for him? He's sick. We've already promoted it. We've already got it out for solicitation. We got to have, basically, they didn't have the interior of the book. They had everything else done. They didn't have the interior.
Didn't have the book.
They didn't have the book. And I said, sure, I can do that. And so I basically copied his voice, copied his style, and wrote his book for him. And it hit #1 on the Times list under his name. And everybody loved it. And he loved it. And that got my reputation out to all the other companies. There were a lot of companies at this point in time. And I getting hired to when one of their big guns, and I would be hired by the publisher, not the writer. The publisher hired me. And the quicker they needed the book, the more I charged.
Sure.
Bottom line, if you're going to make me rush on this, you're going to pay.
Yeah.
And I did numbers of those. They're all under, of course, I can't disclose. Although there were a couple of them that the author themselves broke the disclosure. Jonathan Frakes, there was a period when they were doing, the movie star people were writing books, and Shatner and Judy and Garfield Reeves wrote all of Shatner's books, and a couple, and somebody else wrote one of the other books for Shatner. But Jonathan Frakes, they wanted me to write a Jonathan Frakes book. And they needed it really fast because the first author that did it had written a really bad book. He was a good author. It just was the wrong book for Frakes. And so I said, sure, I'll do that. So I took the cover that they'd already solicited for, and I wrote the novel around the cover. And it was an 80,000 word novel. I wrote it in 3 days and got it in, and it was the content. But Frakes, in the meantime, said, I don't want to have, somebody had interviewed him, and they were asking him how it was to write the book. We'd never met me. We had never talked anything else. And so he got really concerned about having those kind of interviews because he couldn't lie. He's a really nice guy. And he said, no, we got to put Dean's name on the inside. And they ended up putting it on the inside, and they ended up redoing the cover and putting it on the outside too. Same art, but just with my name on it. So that broke the non-disclosure. So I could say, I wrote that book. And there was one other. Random House came to me and wanted me to write a big thriller for a Christian writer who only wrote nonfiction. But for some reason, they decided that he needed to write a big thriller, using his Christian benefits. And I went, well, sure, I can do that. I can write this. And the author, wanted it to be set in northern Thailand. Well, I know nothing about Thailand. I went and found one book. It had one paragraph on northern Thailand, and that was everything. I just made everything up from there. And they liked it. Random House really loved it. But he got the same question from an interviewer. How was it like to write this book in northern Thailand? How was it? Was it really fun to write and all that? And he realized he was in the same fix. He couldn't lie, especially as a Christian person, I guess. I don't know nothing about what he was teaching or anything else. I just kind of took one of his books, and he had quotes all through his book. So I put a quote at the top of every chapter. That's all I did. It was really simple. And it turned out to, hit the Times list, but it had my name on it too, because he just couldn't do that. So 2 of those broke. And a Star Trek book that I wrote for a big name also was broken by the other author. I was asked to sign it one day in a convention, and someone brought this Eric Catani book up to me. And I'm like, I didn't write that. That's Eric Catani, even though I had, but I was signed contractually. And they said, well, your name's in it. And I'm like, what? And I pulled it out, and my name was in the inside under Eric Catani's, as with Dean Wesley Smith. And I'm like, oh, that was the 3rd edition. The 1st edition had come out with only his name, and he'd got the same kind of questions. And he said, 3rd edition, you've got to put Dean's name in there. And someone came up, and it was like 5 years after I wrote that book before I realized that contract was broken. So, but yeah, I wrote a lot of that kind of stuff.
Wow. So now,
Writers of the Future.
Writers of the Future. So this is volume 1. I'm holding in my hand, and
you know what really bothers me about that book every time? It's always brown. It's aged. You can't find that book that's not aged. And I look at that book and think, am I really that old that the paper has aged that much in a book that I was in? But I mean, you just can't.
I wasn't going to go that direction. The direction I was going to go
38 years. Yeah.
Was page 283, Dean Wesley Smith, a story called One Last Dance.
Uh-huh.
So
one of my favorite stories, and I've never reprinted it. I need to get it out and reprint it. But I have to have somebody type it in, because I wrote that on a manual typewriter.
Yeah, we've got 2 issues on these earlier ones. Is one, when these first released, there was no such thing as digital rights.
There was nothing, yeah.
And it was mass market. So any other stuff, we don't have the rights for. And so while we could probably get, the amount of work to go through and get every one of these people to give new rights on, it's
most of us haven't. I mean, a lot of those writers are gone.
Yeah.
And most of us have not typed in that story. I would give it to somebody and say, type this in word for word. And, but that's the only way it's ever going to see print again, is to get it into an electronic format.
Yeah.
But I love that story. Jack Williamson is the reason that story's in that book.
Really?
Yes. AJ Algis Budrus, the coordinating judge on that, he liked it enough, but it wasn't one of his favorites.
Yeah.
But Jack Williamson, who had just lost his wife and had, he was an older gentleman. I think he was in his 70s or something, and that book came out. And he just identified with the characters, because it's about 2 old people dancing in a nursing home, and science fiction. It's a fantasy science fiction story. But Jack just absolutely went to bat for it. And he said it needs to be, even though it wasn't a winner, it was a finalist. And Jack Williamson is the reason my story's in there.
Wow. I did not know that.
I didn't know that until I'm sitting in Jack Williamson's kitchen about 15 years later in Portales, New Mexico. Chris and I were guests of honor at one of his big seminars that he had down there, science seminars. And he was like, and he says, yeah, I really had to fight AJ to get that story in. And I'm kind of looking at him. We're in Jack Williamson's kitchen. I'm gosh wowed, and only about 20 feet from his writing office, which was like Mecca as far as I was concerned. I mean, he sold his first short story in 1928, and so one of the great pulp writers of all time, right there with Hubbard, and so I'm sitting there, and he said, yeah, and I said, what do you mean you had to fight AJ for that? And he goes, oh yeah. He said, I actually threatened AJ that I wouldn't be a judge anymore if you didn't put that story in. And I'm like, okay, thank you, Jack, because that really helped my career massively to have that story in there. And he really fought for it. And he told me that at the banquet that night too. He actually,
Yeah.
talked to me about the story and said how much he loved it. And to have Jack Williams, I mean, I've been reading him literally my entire life, and suddenly to have him come up and talk about one of my stories, that's life-changing. That's life-changing.
And that's something that the contest does with a lot of these winners I've been talking to and interviewing, just how much they appreciate you and the other judges who are here to help just answer their questions.
I can't pay Jack back, and I can't pay Harlan Ellison, one of my other mentors, and I can't pay, he was a judge in that book too, and I can't pay, some Fred Pohl and Gene Wolfe, who taught at the first conference, and and with AJ and Jack. I can't pay them back; they're all gone. And so, that just is like, well, the only thing I can do is exactly what they did: pay the future writers.
Yeah.
And that's what so much of this is about. That's why Hubbard set that up, is to help the future writers. And that's why we're all judges, is try to help the future writers.
Yeah. I'm just curious, since you've been around since the get-go, when I spoke with Robert Silverberg, he said, this is a great concept. If it's around for a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years would be awesome, and for a while, like every 5 years or 10 years on the 25th anniversary, then again on the 30th, say another essay. And he'd just like, I thought if this went around for 5 or 10 years, that would be awesome. But what's your take on it? What do you see as the best ingredient or couple of ingredients that makes it so that it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger?
Well, I think the basic idea that Hubbard came up with and funding it up to start with, and keeping it really isolated with the writers, and with the focus on the writers and the focus on the writing and the focus on the stories, I think that is a foundation that's just hard to crack. And then, to be honest with you, not meaning, anything, it's you folks. It's you guys that keep this running. And keep that whole vision in mind and keep it focused on the vision. You haven't let it drift off that vision, of that initial vision at all. And that's what makes this continually so good. Why so many writers are just like not missing quarters to submit stories. So many, that group I talked in front of this afternoon, the writer winners, wow. Those are some sharp people, and that makes me feel really good for the future of fiction, the future of science fiction and fantasy. They're sharp, they're business, they're hungry. All of them had that light in their eyes of, I want to learn. And I was kind of messing with the brains too, some of the stuff that I do, because I'm kind of blunt. But that's kind of I think it's a combination. I think it's the solid foundation. And then all of you guys fighting through all the problems that come up year after year and keeping it focused on the writers. I don't think a lot of us judges would be around if you didn't do that, because we're here because of the young writers. And you guys' focus are laser on that. You try to help the young writers. You don't tell them to do it a certain way. You just say, here's the information. So I'll be talking about something. Kevin Anderson will have a different opinion. McCaffrey will have a different opinion. Then I'm sure Benford tomorrow is going to have a different opinion. He's the guy that I shook his hand as I walked across the stage on the first one.
Yeah.
It's going to be, I haven't seen him for 2 or 3 years. He and I became, friends over the years, but he's in that very first picture of me walking across the first stage. There's Greg. I'm shaking his hand. So it'll be fun to shake his hand again tomorrow after all these years. Yeah. And so, but yeah, I think it's a combination of two. I think it's the laser focus from you guys and the incredibly solid foundation of the focus itself.
Yeah.
And, and so I just think it's, and the focus on learning. That's the third thing. You're giving these people learning. I was at the very first workshop too. It took 2 years after the first contest before AJ managed to put together the first workshop, because they were really focused on the learning there. And that first workshop was Algis Budrus, Jack Williamson, Fred Pohl, and Gene Wolfe. The people who understand science fiction go, and it was for an entire week sitting at the feet of these giants, and there was only 12 of us. And that was that was awe-inspiring and changing, just like I'm seeing these kids here now being changed by this, by what you guys are doing here.
That's the thing that really, I think, at least for me, gives me that, satisfaction, what we're doing, all the work we go through, all the things to be able to pull it off.
I watch you guys work so hard on this thing every year. I'll be sitting there and watching you guys running in different directions and to put out this fire and to solve this and to make sure this happens. And it's amazing to watch. It's because I put on contests my phone.
11:35 at night. I got to get this last podcast in because I got a video crew coming in. So what I had is podcast for tomorrow night needs to turn to videos so I can do, that.
Yeah. And it's mind-numbing to watch you guys. Again, that's why we're here, and we can't do much to help us old pros, but we're here to, maybe offer a little moral support and at the same time. And
teach these guys is just, we cannot do that at all. That's why you're here. That's why we so respect what you're doing, and the fact that some of you guys have insane careers and schedules to keep it, but to take that week out and to come here and do this stuff is just, it's not a paid gig for you.
And no, we don't, you don't pay us anything for this. This is us.
We'll fly you in. We'll give you the hotel, or we'll drive in and
and this is us trying to help the new writers.
Exactly.
We know you have a group of incredibly self-selected by their own writing. That's how you guys judge. And having Jody as the new judge is just fantastic. That was a tremendous selection. When I heard that, I just went, oh, that's absolutely perfect. Of course, it wouldn't have crossed my mind, of all the people to replace Dave, it wouldn't have crossed my mind to have Jody. But the minute you announced her name, I'm like, well, of course, that's the absolute best. And so that was because she's going to be able to really help. And she's got her feet in both the old school of publishing and the new traditional. And so she was able to help balance that with Tim Powers, teaching, and then people like me coming in, and Kevin and Rebecca and Todd McCaffrey, all of us who are working in the new world of publishing now. I used to work in the old world, now I work in the new, and being able to, and you give us enough time to actually explain the stuff that we're doing. You gave me 2.5 hours today out of those kids' schedule, and I filled it real solid.
I mean, you're one of the ones that when you used to come in and get an hour, I went, I got to get him more. I got to get him more. So then I took charge of the writing workshop this year and worked out the schedule and what it would be. Yeah. And I don't necessarily want to do it again because it's.
Well, this year I was really fascinating because a lot of the instructors were sitting there listening to me, because Chris and I are the farthest along in the indie world and the indie publishing and making a living and doing all the different stuff that goes on in that world. And so, Tim was sitting there the whole 2.5 hours, Jody was sitting there the whole 2.5 hours. Nina Creaky Hoffman was sitting there she came up to me afterward and she said, I really want to do all this stuff, but I don't know how I'd ever do it, because she's had health issues and other stuff. And she was in the first volume with me too.
Yeah.
And she's one of the judges here now too. And so, yeah.
No, it was important to give you, you had to have
enough room to give the whole story.
Yeah.
And the perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Man. I knew that you'd be able to fill it easily.
Yeah.
So now you came in writing science fiction, fantasy, and I mean, your history, I don't know how many people know about your history. So I think that's fascinating too, from the pro circuit, golf circuit to writing. Did it go writing, golf, writing, or where did writing enter the scene?
It basically, the story is I was a golf pro in Palm Springs, California. I was a head pro down there at a very young age. I had gotten lucky and good, I guess. And some of the sponsors thought I was a good enough player. Some of my members on my course thought I was a good enough player, and they thought I should head out on the tour. Well, at this point, there was no qualifying schools or anything else. This was in the ancient days of the PGA system. And by and large, I was called a trunk slammer. I would go to the qualifying event ahead of the tournament on Sunday usually. And then I would play in the qualifying. And if you didn't win or get second or third place in the qualifying event of all these pros playing trying to qualify, then you took your clubs out to the parking lot, threw them in the trunk of your car, slammed the lid, and headed for the next tournament. And the rest, the two or three that made it, got to play in the tournament that started on Thursday. And then if you made the cut in the tournament, you actually made some money. So it was a pretty brutal kind of thing. That's why, you know, the rich people in my golf club in Palm Springs were sponsoring me. They'd sponsor me for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, and then I'd come back. I only made one tournament out of 12 tries, and I did not make the cut in that tournament, but I got to play in one tour event, and that was really fun. I mean, I was a PGA pro. I was doing that. But it dawned on me at that point that probably wasn't the life for me. I could have kept really working at it to get that last little over the top, so I was good enough to, you know, start making some money.
Yeah.
But my heart wasn't in it, and it was all because of a book. This book sabotaged me beyond words. I was this head pro. I was partying a lot. I was young. I was out on the tour, you know, every 4 weeks, and then they'd fund me for another 4, and I'd have my assistant pro at the course take over the course for 4 weeks, and I'd be out, you know, out again traveling, and you know, staying in hotel rooms and just and drinking too much probably. And one of the aspects is I found a book that one of my members said they had just read and really loved it, about a mining town that went underwater in Idaho in 1909. And I went, no mining town went underwater in Idaho. I'm born and raised in Idaho. I've been in those mountains a lot because my grandparents were pioneers and they would show me the old mining towns. They never mentioned a town going underwater. But this was a Zane Grey book called Thunder Mountain. And I checked it out of the tiny little Palm Springs library at that point and read it and just went, this isn't possible. So on the next tour out, when I was out playing, I slammed the trunk in one event and went, I'm going to cut through Boise, go out of my way, and check at the Historical Society. Well, they didn't have any record of it. And it took 3 days there, and I ended up missing the next tournament, missing qualifying, because I spent it in Boise looking in the Historical Society. We finally found record of it. And it was a town called Roosevelt. And it had gone underwater because a mudslide come down right below it, and the spring melt had completely flooded this 10,000 person town, and it vanished. And so I literally was tired of being a golf pro. I needed to get back to college. I went back to college and have a master's in architecture. And then I went to 3 years of law school. And I'm not a lawyer, but I went to 3 years of law school.
Yeah.
And that book just haunted me. And so the first year I was back up in college and went back to the University of Idaho. And I became an assistant pro at the course on the University of Idaho campus. I was their assistant pro. I'd gone from head pro in Palm Springs, touring player, to an assistant pro at the University of Idaho, and just to make some summer money and do this. But we hiked in there. We went into the wilderness area in Idaho, a friend of mine and we hiked down, and I stood on the edge of that lake, and you can see the buildings down through the water. And it was just like, wow, I'm like, this is real. And from that point on, I started writing. And I was 25 years old when I started writing, 24. And I started writing some poems. I sold a bunch of poems, sold my first 2 short stories in 1974, and then made a whole bunch of mistakes, which I try to warn people off of when I teach and other stuff, that cost me 7 years. I was trying to write, but I didn't do anything for 7 years. And it wasn't until 1982 that I found Heinlein's rules and how real pros do it instead of English teachers. And I followed the real pros, and I started talking to them more and going out to conventions and talking to them, and like, oh, this is how they really do it.
So what were some of these things that were
I was rewriting everything. Awful. That's the worst thing you can do as a writer, is rewrite it. It just makes it dull and boring. It makes it same. It's like polishing a rock. Polished rocks all look the same. They're all got different colors, but they all still look the same. What really makes a rock unique is when it has the edges and the sharp points and my personality still in it. And so the moment I stopped rewriting and just wrote one draft, didn't write sloppy, wrote clean, and mailed it just like Hubbard did in his day, you know, which is, you know, people you can learn from. You got to go to the pros, just like Bradbury did, just like, you know, Lawrence Block and all the other people I admired. Harlan would sit in a bookstore window and write one draft on a manual typewriter and put the pages in a window, you know, and those stories would win awards, and he would never touch them, never rewrite them. So the rewriting myth is a nasty myth, and that cost me 6.5 to 7 years. I was just making all my stories dull and boring. And the first two I'd written and sold were first drafts. But that never dawned on me that maybe it's because they were first drafts that they sold. And so I finally stopped doing that. I started writing faster. Writing slow is deadly. I started writing faster. I started doing some other stuff, and I mailed everything. I just wrote it, mailed it. And that's how that story in Writers of the Future, that's exactly what happened. My second wife and I were getting back together. We were still really good friends to this day, but she and I were going to try it one more time, and we were going to move to the coast and try it one more time, and like that. And so she was I had an apartment in Portland, Oregon. She was coming over from Idaho, where we had lived at the University of Idaho and where we'd gotten married. And she said, what do you do? And I said, oh, damn, I forgot the deadline. It's tonight. It has to be mailed by tonight. She said, what deadline? I said, the one that AJ wanted, that he's doing this new contest. And she said, well, write it. And I said, well, I haven't started. My typewriter's packed. And she said, unpack it, put it on a box, and sit down and write the story. And I'm like, okay. And so I sat on the edge of the bed with my typewriter, manual typewriter, actually electric typewriter at that point, on a box. And I wrote that story and put it in an envelope. And as we were headed for the coast to move me to the coast and her and me to the coast, I mailed it before midnight. And that's how that story came about.
Wow.
It's lasted the longest. It's still in print, and it's still doing great for me. And it was one draft on an electric typewriter, sitting with a typewriter on a box while I was in the middle of moving. That's what you have to do. You have to make priorities.
Yeah, that's really good. So you handled the misadvice of rewrite that you got
comes from English teachers and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Who themselves have never published. And then you say you started listening to Highline and his 5 rules, and any other things that helped set you on the path to success from what you can see?
Doing exactly what the young writers are doing here, getting out and talking to the pros. Meeting Chris at the first Writers of the Future workshop. That's where I met Christine Catherine Rush, who's my wife. We've been together for 36 years now. It was 2 years after the first book, and that was 36 years ago in, I think, April, May.
You met in Taos, right?
We met in Taos. Well, and actually, we met in Albuquerque because AJ somehow tracked me down at my father's house in Arizona. This way before cell phones and any of that.
Yeah.
He tracked me down and said, there's these 2 writers that have flown into Albuquerque. They don't have a ride up to Taos. Can you pick them up? So AJ told me to pick up my wife. And we never were apart since. We've been together ever since that workshop.
Yeah, she's an amazing person.
Oh, yeah.
Preaching to the choir there.
Yeah, she's a heck of a writer, I'll tell you. 2 writers survived all these years together. That all by itself should be a world record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, for the aspiring writer itself, you've give a lot of advice, and you have a basic structure that you go over, like when you talk to the winners today. It's a new world. So we've already established from the one essay that we started off this with on the booze and taboos, and a little bit of your history, and then the bad advice that stumbled for 7.5 years. Now we've got a new world. So a little bit about that, please. We're about 3/5 done right now with this interview. The new world is the indie world, the indie publishing world. That's where the writer is in control of everything about the book. And this new world has allowed it because of the Kindle broke that revolution in 2008. And now there's lots of companies that are helping. Yeah. And all the way from book funnels to, everything else. It just helps us a lot. Chris and I started a new company after we realized what was going on, because New York traditional publishing thought electronic publishing was stupid, but they were worried about it since about 1990. So the sky was always falling. It was always going to change. And when I was working in different things in traditional publishing, I cannot tell you how many meetings I sat through where they were all worried about the newest electronic thing. And I have one of my books was #1 on Rocket Reader in the year 2000. And, I pushed John Grisham off the top of the list, which meant I was the best hockey player in Ecuador, basically. It meant nothing. And it wasn't until the Kindle, and when the Kindle finally hit,
Traditional publishing was already tired of The Sky is Falling, so they paid no attention. So what occurred was Kindle needed to fill all those things that they were selling at Christmas. They needed content. And that's when the writer said, hey, I can make my own cover. Hey, I can publish it myself. I can do all of this. And then that whole indie world started building. So now writers are their own business. They do their own covers. They do everything. We are in control. And in the old days, that was not the way. Everybody else did it. And we had, if you got a bad cover, you had no say in it. If somebody really messed up your book, I had one book that the chapters were scattered out of order through the whole book. And there's nothing, they didn't even bother to reprint it. And, because it was just, it was a pocket book. It was a gaming book. It was called Unearth. And not only was my chapter scattered, but writer Ryan Hughes, I think, which was a pen name for another major writer, they took some of his chapters and put them in my book, took some of my chapters and put them in his book, because there was a person down in production that was really angry, and they'd just been fired, but they hadn't been kicked out of the building. And so they went in and just scattered all these things, and nobody caught it. And that book came out, and I'm reading it. I'm looking at it going, heck, I didn't write half of this. And what order is that? That's the third to the last chapter right there at the opening. It just was awful. And they didn't bother to reprint it. That's how you were out of control with traditional publishing, and still are.
Yeah.
And for us indies who like control and like to be in charge, that's what it is. The new world is you're in charge. The other new side of the new world is you can make an enormous amount more money. Just enormous, because traditional publishing pays a royalty of anywhere from 8% to 15 or 16%. So you've got a $5 book and you're making 8% on it, you're going to make 40 cents. Well, you sell that exact same book on a $5 electronic book through Amazon or through Kobo or something like that, you make $4 or $3.50. And $3.50 for one sale versus 40 cents, we make a lot more money.
Yeah.
And those who know what they're doing, and it takes a little while, it takes a little build up. There's a path, just like there was a path to get into traditional publishing. It's not one book, it's more like 20 or 30 books.
Well, there's that Michael Anderle with
20 to 50.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. If you publish 20 books and it sells very few copies each book, but it builds up, they all build up. And the real thing that I was trying to teach the writers today more than anything else is that books don't spoil. They're not bananas. Where New York treats books like bananas. Traditional publishing, they put it out, it's a launch, and then 3 weeks later, it's like the banana has gone black, and they pull it off the shelf when it's done, and they replace it with fresh bananas. And that's what they do. And that's how they treat books in their minds. Traditional publishing thinks books spoil. Well, those of us in indie publishing know books don't spoil. We actually will often make more money on the fourth or fifth year of the same book than we did on the first. I've had a number of series explode after I'm like 9 or 10 books in, and they've been selling 1 or 2 copies a book, and we don't promote them or do anything. And then one day something happens and it just explodes up. I had my Cold Poker Gang mystery series was at the top of Amazon for quite a while. And I have 9 books in that series at that point. I think I got 10 now, but I had 9 at that point. And made unbelievable amounts of money. The sales of just that 1 week on just Amazon alone that I could see, those sales on just the second book, the third book, and the fourth book in the series would have made me on the Times. I'd have been on all 3 of those books would have been on the Times list if, traditional publishing actually counted that stuff.
Right.
And so it's a brand new world, and it's a fantastic world for writers. Right now, pretty much any new writer coming in is looking at indie. Very few are still stuck in the 1990s myth of going to traditional publishing. Traditional publishing is dying quickly, very quickly. It has no way it can make any money. There's just the sales where there used to be giant peaks, I'm showing a peak here with my hands. That really works on a podcast. But basically, it used to be giant peaks where the Pattersons and the Kings would make these enormous amounts of money, enormous amounts of sales. Now those are rounded foothills. They just don't, even the big names are not getting like the same amount of money or the same amount of sales. The whole thing has shifted way down. The bestsellers are making 1/10 to 1/20 now of what they made in traditional, literally 10 years ago. It's
so now with you're talking about indie.
Mhm.
Now, is some of that would also be constituted as self-publishing versus indie? Because when I think of indie, I think of your publishing house. I'm thinking of Eric Flint's with his publishing house.
Galaxy Press. Galaxy Press is an indie press in the world, in all senses of the word.
Yeah.
You choose different distribution systems sometimes than we do at WMG. Is Chris and I's publishing house. We have 3 employees and a whole bunch of part-time employees and contract labor, but we have 3 full-timers. And we choose different kinds of distribution systems. And you choose different kinds of distribution systems. We're all after the same thing. We're all going to readers.
Yeah.
Traditional publishing never goes to a reader. They go into the trade channel. And the trade channel is down the, go to a distributor, go to a warehouse, go to this, then eventually it gets to a bookstore. And then the bookstore owner worries about the reader. But we authors now in indie, we worry about the reader. We are direct to reader versus direct to trade.
Exactly.
And see, and the you guys do both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're direct to trade and direct to reader, so you've got a hybrid going on, which is really cool, and I think will serve you well, given some time here.
Absolutely.
And I think that the best way to look at that is there is no self-publishing anymore, because every writer who chooses to go to be a self-publisher becomes a business. And that's an indie press. It's a small press, you know, and even if they say, well, I'm publishing my own work, well, they still have to have a business. They still have to have a publishing name. They still have to, and they basically start their own business, and they start an indie press. So that's why the term indie, independent press, has picked up. And so a brand new writer with their first book can come, do the cover, do whatever, and publish it. And they still have to have a business name on it somehow. And so therefore they're an independent publisher.
Got it.
And that's where indie comes. And so the self-publishing.
I've been looking at, you've got traditional, you got indie and self. So
the self has pretty well died off, because back from up until 1950, indie publishing was a major way of doing it. In fact, we wouldn't be reading Edgar Rice Burroughs if it wasn't for indie press, because his son started a press. Burroughs couldn't sell another book. And his son said, I'm going to publish all your work, Dad. And they started, and they're still in existence. You go to the licensing expo in Las Vegas in May, and there's a Burroughs booth there for Burroughs Publishing.
Right.
And, you know, they've been indie. But then in 1950, Writer's Digest, bless their heart, put an ad on the back of the magazine. And it's of an old courthouse in, I don't know why they picked the courthouse in Colville, Washington, but they did. And it was on their ad, and it was for Vanity Press. And people would pay them money to publish their book. And what would happen is these 4 people would pay a lot of money. They'd get these really bad books back and put them in their garage, and they maybe sell 4 copies. And they would have until they mold it out, and then they have to put them in a dumpster. That was Vanity Press. So from 1950 until 2008 with the Kindle, that was really looked down on.
Sure.
And it should have been. They were awful. I never saw a good Vanity Press published book, ever. Just didn't happen.
Right.
So all of us learned over that 58 years that Vanity Press was bad. You know, self-publishing was bad. You had to go to the New York publishers, otherwise you were not approved with their fairy dust. And so basically that's how, and so now self-publishing still brings back that feeling of vanity, and it's just not. It's not at all. It's completely the author's in control. They can do a bad book. They can do a good book. You can't now, most of the independent publishers, you can't tell the difference from one of our books versus a traditionally published book. You just can't tell the difference, because we use top artists. We know how to do blurbs. We do everything else.
So, okay, I'm tracking with that now. Now, I've also got a definite consideration or an idea that some type of a traffic cop that says, this is good, this is trash.
Gatekeepers.
Yeah, gatekeepers. What's your opinion about that?
We have them. We have them in the indie. You know what they are? Readers. If you write a bad book, no reader buys it, except your family.
Right.
You know, and then they don't bother to read it. They just put it on the shelf and say, hey, look, my nephew did this or something like that. No, readers are your goal. And it takes a while to build up. But if, again, books don't spoil, so it's sitting there on the shelf and it can be in print for a long time. And if readers start to discover it, you've written a good book, And if it starts to sell and you fix maybe your bad cover or your bad blurb or something, and then it sells. And so readers are the gatekeepers. They're their own gatekeepers. We as indie writers have to trust readers.
Mm-hmm.
New York never paid any attention to any reader and still doesn't. They don't, if that editor who just got out of Vassar 2 years earlier and has really strong opinions, that's their gatekeeper. And it's like, okay, why would I trust that person? They don't know anything. They haven't even lived long enough to know anything. I've got books that are older than them. That book's older than most of the editors in New York. And, and so that's just a false thing, that gatekeeper, because what a gatekeeper is one opinion. Well, does that editor at Tor or at Bantam or something like that, do they speak for my tastes? No, I want to have my own tastes. And I'll buy a book if I want, or I'll see it on a Kickstarter and go, oh, that's a cool looking book. And I'll back the Kickstarter so I can get that book early.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. It's just, the readers have tastes. We're all readers. We as writers have to trust the readers. Those are the gatekeepers.
That's a very good answer to that.
Thank you.
Yes. So now on the steps that a person should go to, because you've done a lot to build your name, to build your mailing list, to build your social presence. What have you found to be the most, like I remember one time speaking with Neil Gaiman, this is several years ago when he first came to America, and he was making it big. And I asked him, so what's been the biggest thing for you that made your entrance into America? And he said, it was my daily journal. It wasn't anything that the publishers did. It wasn't anything from any of the marketing or advertising. It was like my daily journal. I came and I built up fan followers, and they were watching it as it was happening. They were following along. And that's for him, he said, what made the difference for his big breakout in America. Because at that point, he was a British author. So what's your opinion on like what an aspiring writer or even an established writer who's trying to now get some livelihood out of it?
Do stuff that fits you, that fits who you are as a person, as a writer. Don't try to imitate somebody else. Because I had not been writing for about a year because I was taking care of an estate of a friend. I came back in August 1st of 10 years ago from right now to writing full time, be really going at it because again, I'd lost a year on this estate, and I started a blog. And every night I blog. Sometimes it's about something I'm promoting. Sometimes it's about some writing thing, or I'll get something, or I'll talk about marble collecting, or I'll talk about whatever. But I haven't missed a day for 10 years, almost 10 years, 2 months short of 10 years right now. And I'll be back in my room here in a little bit and do a blog for tonight, and for almost 10 years, with power outages and computer failures and everything else, I have managed to put a blog up every night for 10 years. And so I have a lot of followers. Usually they read it twice a week, but it's thousands and thousands of followers. And so if I say, hey, take a look at this. I mean, last night I told him to go to Kevin's Kickstarter that's ending, to get the raw file. And a whole bunch of people went streaming over there who wanted to dictate their books, to get how Kevin Anderson dictates his book. They can get the raw file in this Kickstarter. And so basically it's do what's right for you. We do a lot of Kickstarters. I think we've done almost 20 of them now. We make an enormous amount of money on them, which is great fun, but it also gets a lot of our books out, gets our fans to have our books early. And we do a lot of our writing workshops in the Kickstarters too, because about 17 years ago, I started online because Chris and a couple other writers badgered me to do an online workshop, on writing workshop. And I went, okay, I'll try it for a little while, like 6 months, and then I'll quit and that'll be it. Well, now all these years later, WMG has over 220 different writing workshops.
Wow.
In our thing, basically WMGworkshops.com. We're a brand new website. We're just building it, but it's got some stuff there and it has links to everything's on Teachable. And so, that's helped a lot. But my blog has gone to being a writer blog. Chris does a business blog every Thursday that is at a high level of business for writers, really high level. And so she has an enormous amount of followers on that, and often will go viral with that blog because she's like me. She's very blunt. And Christine Catherine Rush, my wife. And basically past that, we just find every way we can to get our books out to readers. We do book bubs regularly, and to do promotion that way. We do the Kickstarters, we do ads on Amazon, we do all kinds of stuff. We don't spend a lot of money. In fact, WMG has a $400 a month advertising budget. That's all I allow them. And they will come to me every so often and say, we got this Kickstarter, but that's going to cost us $380. Can we have an extra $380 for the book bub? And I'm like, yeah, for the book bub, you can have the extra $380, but I'm the CFO, so I control the purse strings.
Right.
And so they have to come to me if they want over and above, but they find amazing ways for that $400 to promote over 1,000 titles that we have. They're really selective. They work on campaigns and different things that they do. Basically, my suggestion is for Neil, that was right for him. It fit him, it fit his personality, and it turned out to be the right thing.
Yeah.
I would suggest for writers to just do what fits them, but focus on the writing, especially early on. The 20 to 50 is exactly right. Focus on the writing and focus on learning. Focus on learning craft and learning business, from books and from workshops and like that. Don't miss Writers of the Future submission, of course, every quarter.
Right.
But, because if you win this and get in, oh my God, this week is so valuable to be able to listen to Tim Powers and Jody Lynn and I battling it out up there in that way. And then have me come in and have Kevin Anderson come in and have Greg Benford come in and Larry Niven this afternoon. That's just, you can't buy that.
Right.
Yeah. There's, writers would be out there trying to buy that. And of course, you wouldn't get all of us pros if you guys were making a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
We know you're all losing money, so we're coming to help. So that just do what's right for you. Do what fits you. Don't try to copy other people.
Okay, that's good advice. And then, do you recommend that it's good to have your own following? At what point is that important?
Oh, sure, absolutely important. You probably should be on social media with the underline of the word social. Don't just go there to sell a book. Be friendly, talk about your cats, talk about whatever. It's social. And whatever suits you. Like I'm on Twitter, but I never go there. And Chris said, oh, you got 4,000 people following you on Twitter. And I'm like, why? I do. She says, well, every so often I'll forward one of your things from Facebook to Twitter. And I'm like, well, thank you. I have no idea. I don't have that big a Facebook following. I think I got 4,000 or something on Facebook, but I don't post much on Facebook either. So I'll spend 5 minutes a day on social media because it's just not who I am.
For you, it's the blog.
The blog, my website, deanwesleysmith.com, and it's just, that's what I do, and the workshops. And so I'm always communicating with young writers continuously,
right?
Because I have all these workshops, and I make it totally free to ask me any question. So if you've got a question about something and you're taking one of the workshops, just write me and I go, yeah, here's where you find it. Here's how it's done. Here's my suggestion. Here's my opinion, that sort of stuff. And I don't tell them how to do it because every writer's different.
Right.
But I do teach basics a lot. And then we teach advanced business in this thing. And it's this giant teaching thing. It turned out to be like a university. We didn't intend that. We still don't intend that. But every so often, Chris and I'll go, oh, I know what let's do. Let's teach power words. And I turned to Chris and went, that there isn't a young writer on the planet that knows what a power word is. And I said, that's a stage 4 experienced writer level. I mean, they use them once in a while, but they don't know they use them. And she goes, well, let's do a 6-week workshop on it. I'm like, okay. I said, nobody's going to sign up. Turns out a lot of writers did sign up for it because they didn't know what it was. And if Chris and I are saying, yeah, power words, we're going to teach you for 6 weeks how to use power words. It's just like, oh, wow. Okay. And lots of people said, wow, it really activated my writing. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what power words do. It also holds readers away if you do them the right way. If you need to have a character be close, then you can use certain types of power words to pull a character in close to the reader, or you can use certain types of power words to hold a character off. If you want them, like a villain, you want them to be held off. Well, it's all done in power words. But beginning writers, that's way beyond them. But that's the kind of workshops we teach every so often. We just go, okay, let's teach pacing. That's a stage 4. Most people don't even know how to hit the return key early in their career. I noticed that in some of the stories. I'm going to be working with some of them to help their pacing, because they won't even see it.
Right.
And so I don't want to hold readers away from the story. So, as an editor, I'll be trying to help, with their pacing after they're judged. Not before they're judged. Don't give anybody a break on that. Well, I won't even know who they are until after they're judged.
Yeah. And one last thing, which I've not talked about, but we're at the very end here, is, and this will be the subject of another podcast we'll do later on, is Dean has now come on board as the new editor for Writers of the Future series. Jody came on and she's the new coordinating judge, and Dean is the new editor. And so he'll be working on putting the book together for volume 39, which we are so excited to have you on board. So very much welcome.
Thank you. It's going to be great fun.
Yeah.
I'm so honored to be in the 3 ahead of me. Those 3 were amazing humans that were the editors had.
Yes.
And, and working with Jody, it's the first time the 2 tasks have been separated. And so, we've got to
we'll definitely get on that.
Yeah.
So I said, that'll be the subject of the podcast, because it's going to be, people are going to have questions and all kinds of stuff. So,
and they won't see it until a year from now.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to really cover the subject of the Booze and Taboos article.
Great article.
And,
it's in the new volume.
Yeah.
It's coming in the new volume coming out. And I would highly recommend writers out there read it, get through the language, just realize, this is 1930s language. It's okay. And see what Hubbard was saying. It's absolutely spot on advice.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Dean. It's been an amazing pleasure speaking with you at 12:15 in the morning now.
Luckily, we're night people.
Yes. Yes. And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. The Writers of the Future podcast is available on SoundCloud, iTunes, Pocket Casts, Stitcher, Player FM, iHeart, and Spotify. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. The Writers of the Future series can be purchased wherever books are sold in the U.S., Canada, the UK, Australia, and South Africa, and available everywhere else on Amazon. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to new and amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Dean.
My pleasure. Thank you.
When you're going from brunch with the in-laws to happy hour with your coworker crew, you need a wine that's made for any moment. With 70 calories per serving and 7% ABV, Kim Crawford Illuminate Sauvignon Blanc is full flavor wine with a refreshing taste. Buy Kim Crawford Illuminate at orderkimcrawford.com. Also available in rosé. Make it amazing. Kim Crawford Illuminate Sauvignon Blanc per 5 fluid ounce average analysis, calories 70, carbohydrates 4 grams, protein 0 grams, fat 0 grams. Please enjoy our wines responsibly. 2022 Constellation Imports, Rutherford, California, USA.
SOR. Moving on here as we scroll down. Penman! Zach Martin, nice to see you. And who else is joining us here? Thomas, thank you so much for kicking off the Super Chat tonight. The Super Chat is a wonderful way to support what we do on Spaced Out Radio on a nightly basis. Hi, Sandra. Hi, Sandra. Hi, Sandra. Bobbert, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you as we continue on. I'm going to run out of time here, but I'll try and get as many in. Mr. Catfish, Phil Minervino, how are you guys? Jim Christie, the gorgeous Lacey Blue from Washington State. YJ Overlander, how you doing, buddy? Julio Avalos, nice to see you back again. Rhonda Montpetit, welcome. Uncle Dale and his Power Stasher here. And now, people, hordes up. Let's rock. From the mountains of central British Columbia to you listening around the world, this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you to tonight's show on our terrestrial affiliates around North America and digitally on Odyssey Radio, TalkStream Live, and KPNL. All of our archives are free. Join us at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on TikTok at Spaced Out Radio. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read Shirky Poo's Newswire, check out our swag as well. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by visiting Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. Tonight, we got a great show. Roderick Martin is here talking about the Alien Endgame. Then in hour number 3, we're going to bring you a story from the swamp, courtesy of Swamp Dweller. Tim Senor is in Colorado for the UFO report and the MUFON Symposium. Shirky Poo has the news. Roderick Martin is a big man on a big mission. That is to get the truth. After a successful career in the exotic bird business, Roderick transitioned into his true passion, UFOs. Roderick spent months training to become a certified MUFON field investigator, and since then has spent hundreds of hours in Texas and around the country leading investigations. He's gained popularity through his hugely successful Clubhouse group, Why the Big Secret, with over 25,000 members. He is also the author of How to Become a Clubhouse Influencer and host of Why the Big Secret podcast and YouTube channel, which we want all of you to head on over after this show or during the break to hit subscribe. And even if you're listening on terrestrial radio, hey, do it on YouTube as well. We're going to have a great show here for you tonight. Roderick Martin, welcome to Spaced Out Radio for the first time. It's a real pleasure to have you here, my friend.
Man, I'm so glad to be here with you, Dave. And I will say to the SOR group down there, the Space Out Radio crew, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. And wherever you may be watching this show tonight, we just want to say thank you. And I'm just proud to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you here as well because, you know, every time we get a fresh voice on the UFO topic, it excites me because hearing different opinions from different parts of North America and the world in general, I think is very, very important. And you're somebody who's been coming on strong the last couple of years in popularity. And the fact that you are out there chasing down these UAP or whatever the heck they are in the sky over Texas where you are, I think it does some justice for what we're all trying to accomplish, my friend. So thank you for your hard work.
Well, I appreciate it, and yes, I'm in the jumbo state, and that's where these UFOs like to come out and play. And but it's a Texas thing, so they'll get it.
Yeah, I get it. Now for you, why the passion? Why the desire to know?
It's the curiosity, though, Dave, that's what it's all about, being curious. Now, let's not leave out the fact I saw a UFO when I was 12 years old. Okay. And that's here in Dallas and where I grew up. And I think that probably was the beginning. It has to be the beginning of everything. But once you start getting older, watching the TV shows and all other things that's out there, the curiosity just drives you bananas, just like anything else. The curiosity gets the cat. And I'm a big cat. So, let's do it.
Well, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, tell us about that UFO you saw as a kid.
Well, I grew up in the neighborhood in Dallas near the Dallas Zoo. So probably a few blocks from the zoo. So when it gets dark, it is a jungle out there, and I'm not playing. The lion, all the different noises, and every now and then helicopters because something done got loose. But this particular night, my mom, was pretty in the neighborhood. We had this street light, where everybody hangs out. Yeah. And just like anything else, when nightfall hits, mom at that time, she's not coming out calling you to come in. You have to start eyeing yourself on a porch. And then if that light flicks, it's time to come in. So at that particular night, I thought she did it a little early. I was a little upset. Okay, I'm upset. And because my friends, I'm thinking my mom don't love me like theirs do, who let them stay outside. But now I know she loves me. And so I go to the house, and just when I'm about to make that walk up, and everybody's laughing, nah, you got to go in early, but it's still a little dark, and it's right when the night sky's hit. And I was looking up, and there it was, this white little thing just kind of zipped by, and I was like, wow. And right behind it was 2 jets following it. And then it came back real quick, and it was following them, and that was it. And I didn't realize the significance of the moment, Dave, at that moment. You're young, and I'm 12, and but I knew I wasn't going to go tell anybody, because I grew up in a neighborhood that if you came there back then, this is what the street corners were activated. And even the neighborhood bully wouldn't have said, hey, I saw a UFO last night. His street credit is gone. So I know I wasn't going to say nothing, and I wasn't a neighborhood bully. So it stayed my secret. Months and years went by. Ultimately, you start watching shows. You still start putting 2 to 2 together, or what it was, just not to say, okay, this is now, I can call it orbs or flying saucers or disc. And of course, it wasn't orbs back then anyway. Technology was different. But yeah, so years went by, and the interest was always there. And then one day I decided to support MUFON as a member, and then basically ended up saying, it's time to get in the game, coach.
And you never look back. You just kind of ran with it.
You look up. See, that's the whole deal now. You don't look down anymore, not back. See, and people always ask that question. How come I don't ever see a UFO? When do you walk around looking up every day? And people don't. But if you begin to look up, I tell people the possibility is there that you'll see something. So yeah, and technically, no, I never look back. And it wasn't an easy transition. We can get into that later in the show when it comes down to relationships. I was married, and I was in a situation where I couldn't talk about UFOs in the house, and so that slowed up the process a little bit. So.
Well, you know what? Right before the show, we should actually just let's have a cut break here for 2 seconds, because right before the show, my little guy was in the studio chatting with us, and he's upstairs right now, listening in and wanted to know all about everything you and I were going to be talking about tonight regarding UFOs. So I got to give my little boy a shout out because I'm taking him down to Grandpa and Grandma's tomorrow when I head down to get ready to go to Denver for the MUFON Symposium. So I know he's tuning on